Let me hear you say.
It wasn't as if we could say, oh, that's great, Max, you want to write bangers for the HSC. Turns out we're expert in it. Tell us about the role YouTube played for you.
So I started making music when I was in maybe 7 or year 8 for this kind of music. And YouTube was pretty important for obviously the initial kind of tutorials and things like that. But it's also where I came to get, there were certain YouTubers that I really liked. And as I kind of progressed in there, their channel kind of grew. They released things like sample packs or, projects that we could download. We being subscribers, we could download those things for free. And, those were royalty-free things that we could use in our own songs and we could release with our own, under our own songs. So, this guy, Bishu, is a good example of been following him for quite a while. I find his videos pretty entertaining, pretty creative. So, one of the sample packs I have that I downloaded from him was when he had 700 subscribers. I'm pretty sure that's what it was. There we go.
Did you know him at this point? Because now he's like, I think 156,000.
Yeah, he's got a lot. So I didn't know him when he had 700 subs, but I do remember his first kind of like big song, I suppose, that got out on a record label, which was 4 years ago or so. So for at least a little while, I've been following him.
And so you talked about sources of sample packs, and once we get into your session, we'll see how important sample packs are for this style. And you talked about finding sample packs from YouTubers, but then also commercial sources as well.
There's a few different websites, a few different companies, like of the kind of the big guys of these sample packs that they have. So one of the big ones is a brand called Cymatics, which is one that I'll kind of touch on in a little bit as well. I've got at least 20 or 30 of those sample packs from those guys, just because they release a whole bunch of free stuff. There's some paid ones in that I've got, and they're just really great sources of getting sounds for the kind of genre that you're trying to make. You can kind of like build a library essentially, and so once you get used to what each sample pack kind of has, what the vibe of the drums or the melodies that are in it, you can kind of pick and choose, and as you're making a song, you can be like, oh yeah, I need that drum sample or that melody sample from this pack. I'm going to use it in my own way in my song.
I guess that's an important point, is that you came to us with that. We didn't know how to do that ourselves, particularly when we're talking about HSC composition and originality. That's really important, that we're using royalty free, and that you're not only, like, we'll get into this, but you're not only using them straight out of the box, but you're actually taking them and then using a bunch of techniques to make them your own. That's
kind of the way, and every different genre of music has the way. Whereas I guess in one style, we're not so concerned about, well, that's a piano sound, and it just sounds like a piano. But in EDM, the idea of just using a piano sounds the same as somebody else's piano sound, it's not cool. So in the EDM style, it's all about being clever enough to find the sources. And I guess the hip-hop guys talk about going to the record stores and diving through and trying to find those records. And for people in EDM, trying to find those sound sources that are fresh, but then really knowing how to manipulate them so that nobody can really find where they've come from. Let's have a listen to this bit. This comes from 30 Seconds In.
Everybody in the place start jumping. Let's go. Don't pump, I'm kidding.
Yeah.
Very good.
How do we get from that inspiration, from Switch That, to what's this piece called?
Yep, so this piece was called Freaky, and it was called that just because of, as you kind of heard from that Switch That song, there's a kind of a little bit of build-up of everything, and then there's some vocal sample, and then there's the main kind of section of the song. And at the time when I made this song, I just had some sort of vocal sample I really liked that had the word freaky in it, and that just was fittingly the title of the song.
Walk us through what's going on here.
Yeah, so this is a section of the song. It was similar to the kind of the start and end of what we just played. So if you want, I can play through this one, then I can chat about the different parts going through it. Awesome.
Let me hear you say.
So influenced
so that was
by,
my-
but that's a very different piece of music to what we just heard, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I started off trying to make it more like the inspiration song, and then I just kind of that was kind of my starting point. And then once I kind of achieved that sound, I wanted to kind of deviate and make my own, I suppose, my own twist on that style.
As we're going through this process, we need to remember that we're always thinking, the man to whom we're trying to stick it, but the man is in charge. The man says we have to hand in Western art music notation for this EDM banger. So throughout this whole process, we're thinking, don't forget, we have to make a recording and we have to make some notation. We'll try to bear that in mind as we're recreating this today. So what have you got going on beat-wise in that section?
Beat-wise, it's fairly simple for this song. It's really just a kick, a clap, and then eventually some toms and other snares going on. So I'll just play a section of what this
Okay.
one is. So this song is quite simple in that sense, just because that was a deliberate choice. Because as you kind of heard, there's a lot of things kind of going on, and
Yes.
I felt it didn't really need any other kind of hi hats or other percussive elements to fill it out or anything. It was just already pretty full on as it was.
Talk to us about how you created that.
Yeah, sure. So to create something like this, it is very simple. So when I was touching on the different samples before, this is kind of in FL, all those samples are located on the left here, and I can easily just go into any of these folders. One of my favorite ones is Kashmir, for example, Sounds of Kashmir Volume 1. I can click on this and it has all these other subfolders. So if I wanted to do a kick and a clap, I could go into the kick section. I could choose from one of these types of kicks. Let's say I really liked this one, Punchy Kick 5E. I can
Yep.
drag that in right here.
So you've been inspired, you know the style, you've got some guide tracks, and you've got a feeling it and you know it. And then, so there's a really great audition process in FL, isn't there, where you can click those samples and hear them as you go.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and so for a song, when I'm doing this kind of sound selection, trying to pick sounds that are good for this style of music, like you're saying, it's really easy to just kind of, I can kind of just go through the sounds like that, find one that I really like, and as simple as just dragging it in to the playlist.
Okay.
And
This
then,
part here,
so you've dragged it in and then you've copied it across.
Yeah, so I've just, if I'm dragging, I'll do it again even, so if I'm dragging the same thing in, it will go there, I can move it around, and just by clicking it in, I can just keep on clicking it in as well, like that.
That's really cool.
And-
Now, I think one of the things I've heard consistently over the years is that's not proper music. You're just dragging loops in. But you didn't just drag a loop in, did you? Because that's a particular kind of sample called a one-shot. And
Yeah.
so it's just one sound, isn't it? And so you can see each one of those squares or each one of those waveforms represents a sound, right?
That's exactly right. So it's just dragging in a single sound, and it's really the composition of lots of individual sounds, I think, that kind of make up what your piece is. Obviously, you know, if you're dragging in something that has most of the elements already put together and you didn't really put much, you know, there wasn't really much of an input from the user, then that's a little bit different. But in this case, what I've kind of done, and what I think a lot of producers try to do, is kind of arrange, you know, individual things to create it their own, so that's not really something that anyone else can just drag and drop in. There's lots of things we can do to kind of manipulate the sound and to make it how we like. By that, for example, I know in this style of song, the kicks are usually quite short in length, and so that means the tail of all this section here, doesn't have a large tail. So we can easily just manipulate that by, you know, turning some of these knobs here that reduce the length of it, or we could also, you know, reduce the input if the transient is too harsh for us. We can do that. So there's lots of ways to manipulate it in that sense. If I wanted to recreate what we've done here previously as well, other things we can do to touch on the sound, we can assign it to like an FX channel. I'll just assign it to an 80, for example. I think that one's not being used. And we can apply other effects such as an EQ. So if we listen to this, we can see, you know, where the frequencies are, and if I feel like it's a little bit too heavy in the bass, I can reduce that. If I want it to be a bit crisper, I can boost up the highs as well. Then we can kind of tailor the sound to how I like, which is what I've done with the original sound as well.
Yep.
And if I wanted to add in a clap, how I liked it, like in this song here, I was navigate to the claps. I know for this kind of music that the type of clap they're using is a pre-shifted clap, which essentially means, you can kind of see it. In the clap sample here, the MIDI starts just before the beat. And the reason for that is if I drag this sample in, for example, there's a little bit of a build up into the into the sound. So if I assign this something as well, even if we, there's a little bit of a build up
Yeah,
into
it's
it,
like
kind
a
of creating a
pre-tail.
bit more. Yeah, exactly.
So our plan, everybody, is to go from audio to MIDI to notation.
Always got to think about the end goal here, which is submitting a piece of notation.
If this was just an oral experience, then we'd just be dropping in waveforms and feeling really good about ourselves. But having the MIDI component just adds a level of complexity. So tell us about that, Max.
Converting these kinds of things to MIDI is, as in kicks and claps, are very simple. Because in this kind of music, the kicks are more or less pretty much always going to be just 4 on the floor. It's very easy to create a MIDI version of it. So the way I go about doing that is FL Studio has a great piano roll, which we can use to input MIDI notes, which is what I've done for the original kick here. And let's say this kick, punchy kick 5E, I want to do the same thing. What I can do is I can open up the channel rack, which has every instrument I've used, every sample I've used in this project. So it is a little bit full on. But what I can do is I can create a new pattern, so there's no other instruments that are being used in this, and I can pull up Kashmir Punchy Kick 5E. And because it's just 4 on the floor, I can simply just drag in these notes right here, and if we listen to this, it's exactly the same. So, this is where I have more freedom as well. If I wanted to do something kind of like this, I could just input that into the MIDI. When we do use this to notate, it's just very easy to see what's being pushed out. And if I want to put this into the playlist that's actually part of the song, it's very simple. I can just make sure I select pattern 64. I'll insert a new channel here, and I can just drag that in there. So if I'll just play this and switch between the two sequences, the audio kicks and the MIDI kicks, and we can see that it's the same thing. So that's how you'd kind of go about converting the like the drum beat into MIDI format.
Amazing. So those one-shots effectively become a synthesizer, and just as you would with any MIDI sound, you're just dragging those notes around in the piano roll, and it just becomes a sound source. But in addition to that, I guess your role here is you're kind of pre-transcribing, aren't you? And turning those samples into data in the piano roll, which then becomes data in Noteflight.
What we're seeing there, Max, is a very micro skill of like dragging in the sample, manipulating it to sound like you want it to sound, and then creating some MIDI from that sample that can then be exported out and imported into a notation program. And that simple skill is then applied across different sound sources. So you've got your leads and basses and vocal chops and all sorts of things that you've used in your projects.